Welcome to the Elementary Logic Part 7 video. In this video, we will look at the symbols used in logic. This is very important before we go ahead into the next topic of laws of thought. Let's look at the explanation of symbolism used. In the context of law of thought, symbols are used to express logical principles in a concise and formalized way. So let's look at the different symbols used. So we can use any symbol in capital letters to represent a proposition or a statement. For example, it is raining can be represented as just A. This symbol represents negation, that is not A. So the negation of A is not A. It represents the opposite of the statement A. It's an opposite. For example, if A is it is raining, then not A means it is not raining. I hope it's clear. Let's move on to the next logical operator. This is the symbol used. We are not using this one, we are excluding this. It's almost like an equal to sign, so it denotes equality or identity. For example, A equals A means A is identical to itself, which is the essence of the law of identity, which we will study next in the laws of thought. This symbol represents and. This symbol, almost V, represents or. This we already saw what it means. It means not. So we can use this A and B. Here A or B. A is not equal to B, or A is not B. A is equal to B, or A is equal to A. That is the law of identity. Now let's look into the and conjunction. The logical and conjunction, it combines two propositions and the resulting statement is true. This and this is true only if both propositions are true. So in this and we have this table of called truth table. So when we have two propositions or two variables with an and symbol, which means this we have done it in Excel also. There's an if statement which says that if A and B are true, then only the logical conclusion will come as true. So we have, for example, A and B means both A and B are true. A or B means either A is true or B is true or both are true. This is what it means. We will look at the truth table later on. The logical not or negation symbol inverts the truth of the value of a proposition. So we have already seen this. Not A means it is not true of that A. It is not true that A. Expressions representing the laws. A is equal to A. This is the law of identity. Negating, we are basically inversing not A and not A, and that also is negated. So this symbol we use it for negation. So represents the law of non-contradiction. It states that A and not A, which means both have to be true. Okay, A and not A cannot both be true at the same time. This is what it's saying. Meaning, of course, A and not A cannot. A and A can be, like in this previous one, A and A can be true, but A and not A cannot be true, and that is negated by this symbol. Example, if A means the defendant is guilty, then not A, this is not A, means the defendant is not guilty. Both cannot simultaneously hold true, which is common sense. I cannot say that I am coming and I cannot say I am going. You cannot come and go at the same time. I hope it's clear. Let's move on to the next one. A or not A. This represents the law of excluded middle. Law of excluded middle, law of non-contradiction, which is the negating that both cannot be true. Meaning you cannot contradict something which is true or something which is false. If something is false, you cannot say it is true also. And if something is true, you cannot say it is false. So law of excluded middle, which states that either A is true or not A is true. Either of these is true. There is no middle ground or third option. So this is law of excluded middle. In court cases, the verdict must be either guilty, that is A, or not guilty, that is not A. Let us look at the additional logical constructs. Parentheses, used to group parts of logical expressions and clarify the order of operation, much like in arithmetic, which you have understood, which we know there's an acronym for that, BODMAS, BODMAS, which stands for bracket. Basically you solve the brackets first, then multiplication, division, and so on, or different operators and so on. So we have already seen this. A and not A cannot be true, that is negated, it is negated. So first you read inside the bracket, A and not A both cannot be true, means the negation applies to the entire statement. A and not A, not just the A part. I hope this is also clear. So let's recap the key logical symbols and their meaning. A stands for proposition. It is a declarative statement that can be either true or false. The symbol stands for negation or not, which inverts the truth value of a proposition. So it is either A, and the not or negation of that is not A. And in AND, both the statements have to be true. If something A and B, then it states basically that true if both propositions it connects are true. Or, which is disjunction. AND is known as conjunction, OR is known as disjunction, not is known as negation. It is true if at least one of the proposition it connects is true. Equality or identity is represented by the equal to symbol. It indicates that an entity or proposition is identical to itself. This represents non-contradiction and this represents excluded middle. So why do we use these symbols in logic and law? Basically it indicates towards precision. Logical symbols remove any ambiguity and ensure clarity in representing abstract concepts. It is universal. Symbols are universally understood in formal logic, enabling consistent reasoning across disciplines including law. Application in legal reasoning. Courts often rely on logical reasoning to evaluate arguments, evidence, and laws. For example, A and B. Basically, it is combining multiple facts that need to be true together. That is, the defendant was at the scene and he had a motive. So A and B. A and not A negated, avoiding contradictory judgments. Understanding these symbols ensures a structured and logical approach to reasoning both in academic studies and practical applications like law. Quickly look at the truth tables for logical operators. Truth tables are a systematic way to represent all possible truth values. Below are the truth table for conjunction, which is indicated by AND symbol, disjunction by OR, negation by not, implication means if then, and biconditional means if and only if. Let's look at in detail each one of them. In conjunction, we use the symbol AND. The result is true only if both operands are true. That is, if both the propositions are true, then only the conclusion is true in the conjunction proposition. So only when A and B are true, it is true, otherwise it is all false. Even if one of them is false, it is false. Next, let's look at the disjunction or the OR operand. In this result, the result is true if at least one operand is true. If both are, that is, if both the proposition are false, like this in this, then only the entire conclusion is false. Otherwise, we take it as true. That is, even if A is true, or B is true, or like here both are true or one is true. So we have both true, then the answer will be, the conclusion will be true. If any of them, either A or B is true, then also it will be true. This is exactly opposite of AND or conjunction. Let's move on to the negation, not definition. This results, the result is the opposite of the operand's truth value. That is, if A is true, then this will be false, and this is false, this will be true. So it's a very simple thing, negating. Let's move to the next one, implication, if then. The result is false only if the first operand is true and the second is false. So if the first operand is true and the second is false, that is if then. If the first is true and the second is false, then it will become false. Otherwise, for both truth values, it is true. All three are true. So basically what it is trying to say is that the first operand, that is the first proposition, has to be true. Then the result will be true. So we are using implication. Next, biconditional, if and only if. The result is true only if both operands have the same truth value. That is, if only if both are true, then it will become true, or if only when both are false, it will become true. This is what it means. So we'll have a quick summary of the logical operators. Conjunction is represented by this symbol. It is true only if both the propositions are true. A and B, only if they are true, then it becomes true. In disjunction, represented by this symbol, it is true if at least one of the proposition is true. So we use different type of combinations of operands to come to conclusions. So in negation, if one is true, the other will become false, and vice versa. In implication, it is true unless the first operand is true and the second is false. So the value becomes true if the first operand is true and the second is false. Let's just recap this one of implication. Implication states that if the first operand is true and the second is false, then it becomes false. So we are here in implication. Implication states that unless the first operand is true and the second is false, the whole value is true. Biconditional. It is true if both operands, that is both the propositions, are either true or false, has the same truth value. Okay, now let's start with our main topic of laws of thought. The law of thought are fundamental principles. The laws of thought are fundamental principles that underpin logic and rational reasoning. So laws of thought is very important for the logical and rational reasoning or thinking. They serve as the foundation for critical thinking and formal systems of logic. Aristotle, often considered the father of logic, articulated these principles, and they have since been integral to both philosophy and mathematics. The three classical laws of thought are, this is our main topic, the law of identity, the law of non-contradiction, and the law of excluded middle. These three we already little bit learnt earlier in the symbols to be used in logic, but we'll learn here in more detail. The law of identity. We stated that A is A. This law states that every entity is identical to itself. That is, I am equal to myself, like that. If I have to say, so a pen is equal to a pen. In formal terms, if a proposition A is true, then A is true. Example, a chair is a chair. Or if a statement is true, it remains true. Key features. Emphasizes consistency in defining and identifying entities or propositions. Helps avoid ambiguity in reasoning. Logical expression is A equals to A. How is it relevant in law? So in legal context, the law of identity ensures precise definitions. For example, the term contract must consistently refer to the same legal concept throughout a case. A contract is a contract, like in that sense. Second, law of non-contradiction. That is, something cannot contradict myself, like itself. So if I am saying I am Kaiser, so I cannot be other than Kaiser in that sense. So if I am a certain person, then I am not something or that person. So we'll understand through more examples later on. Let's not confuse ourselves. So law of non-contradiction. A cannot be both A and not A, which we already learned. Not is represented by the symbol. So A and not A cannot be true together. They have to be negated. They have to be negated. So this law asserts that contradictory statements cannot both be true simultaneously. It's common sense. In formal terms, A and not A cannot both be true. Example, a person cannot be both guilty and not guilty. So this is one of the good examples that we can give in the exams of the same crime. So one person cannot be guilty and as well as not guilty of that one crime of the same crime at the same time under the same circumstances. So it's a very good example to give. Key features: it prevents logical contradictions, helps establish coherent and consistent arguments. Logical expression is A and not A has to be negated. Relevance in law: legal reasoning depends on resolving contradictions. A court cannot accept two mutually contradictory claims as true. Next, let's move on to the third one, which is the law of excluded middle. Either A or not A must be true. Either one of this must be true. So earlier when we talked about non-contradiction, we stated either A can be true or not A can be true. And in this we are saying that either A has to be true or not A must be true. This law states that for any proposition A, either A is true or its negation, not A, is true. There is no third or middle option. Example, a defendant is either guilty or not guilty. No middle ground is permissible in a binary legal judgment. Key features: it encourages clarity in decision making, eliminates ambiguity by forcing a clear distinction between alternatives. The logical expression is A or not A. In the previous one we used A and not A. A and not A, which is false. Basically it has to be negated. A and not A cannot be true together. In this case, in the law of excluded middle, either one of has to be true. And in the non-contradiction law, what we stated is that both cannot be true, and here we are saying one has to be true. Relevance in law: legal judgments often rely on binary outcomes. For instance, a contract is either valid or invalid, leaving no room for an intermediate state. So where is it applicable? Where are these laws applicable? That is the laws of thought applicable in legal reasoning. Basically, we need to ensure consistency. The law of identity ensures that legal terms, principles, statutes are consistently applied throughout legal proceedings. We have to avoid contradiction. The law of non-contradiction helps resolve disputes by identifying and eliminating conflicting claims or evidence. Very important. Third, requiring clear judgments. The law of excluded middle drives courts to make definitive judgments, leaving no ambiguity in the interpretation of laws or facts. Let's look at the question and answer for exam preparation. Excuse me for the background disturbance. Question number 1. Define the law of identity and provide an example. The law of identity states that every entity is identical to itself. Example, a legal contract is the same contract throughout its interpretation. The symbol that we use is A is equal to A. This is the law of identity. Explain the law of non-contradiction with a practical example in law. Answer. The law of non-contradiction states that a proposition cannot be both true and false. So, a proposition cannot be both true and false together. Cannot be true. This is true value, not true value. So they cannot be in the same category. At the same time, it cannot be said. This will help us remove contradictions in our arguments, in our reasoning. So a defendant cannot be both guilty and not guilty at the same time for the same crime in the same circumstances. So in this, both cannot be true or both cannot be false. One has to be true, the other has to be false. Let's move to the third question. What is the law of excluded middle? How does it apply in judicial decisions? The law of excluded middle states that a proposition is either true or its negation is true. In judicial decisions, this ensures binary outcomes, such as a verdict being either guilty or not guilty. So we need to come to a conclusion. So law of excluded middle helps us to come to a certain conclusion. We cannot be in a limbo, or we cannot be in the middle not knowing what conclusion needs to be derived. So some conclusion has to come. So either A is true or not A is true. And in the law of non-contradiction, what we stated was that either both A and not A cannot be true together. So that has to be negated. Fourth, how do the laws of thought ensure consistency in legal arguments? The laws of thought provides a logical framework that ensures arguments. Why do we use these laws of thought? So that we can ensure that our arguments are free from ambiguity. That is the law of identity. So that we can clearly identify laws free from contradictions. That is the law of non-contradiction. And indecision, we need to be certain. So that for that we use the law of excluded middle. Next, compare and contrast the laws of non-contradiction and excluded middle. The law of non-contradiction states that two contradictory statements cannot be true at the same time. The law of excluded middle states that a proposition must be either true or false with no middle ground. Both laws eliminate ambiguity but address different aspects of logical reasoning. Now let's look at the MCQs. We can do it together. You can give me the answers, or you can give the answers to yourself as we move forward. Which law states that every entity is identical to itself? So that is the law of identity. The principle that contradictory statements cannot be both true is known as law of non-contradiction. Okay, the law of excluded middle asserts that which one is it? First one. A proposition must be either true or its negation must be true. This is the law of excluded middle. Which law ensures that a proposition cannot be both true and false simultaneously? It cannot be both true and false simultaneously is the law of non-contradiction. In legal reasoning, which law eliminates ambiguity in definition? We do not want any ambiguity in our definitions. So that would be the law of excluded middle, is it? Let's go with this one. That's the law of O. My God. So that's the law of identity. Yes, correct. That is A is equal to A. So we are clearly identifying a certain proposition very clearly. So let's move on to the next one. Let's go on with the fill in the blanks. The dash states that every identity is identical to itself. That is the law of identity. The dash ensures that contradictory propositions, so this is the law of non-contradiction. The law of non-contradiction ensures that contradictory propositions cannot both be true at the same time. The law of non-contradiction. According to the dash, a proposition must either be true or its negation true with no middle ground. So that is the law of excluded middle. The law of excluded middle. Excuse me, I'm not able to hide the answers. That's okay. The dash helps maintain consistency in defining legal terms. The law of identity. Legal judgments rely on the dash to ensure binary outcomes such as guilty or not guilty. So this is the law of excluded middle. The dash prevents courts from accepting mutually the law of non-contradiction. So I'm giving the answers before reading the question itself. So the same can be done. You also can be doing the same thing. Aristotle is credited with articulating the laws of thought. This is the topic that we are reading. Laws of thought. A valid contract is the same contract throughout its interpretation according to the law of identity. Contradictory witness statements violate the law of non-contradiction. That is, a witness cannot contradict its own statement, then it violates the law of contradiction, law of non-contradiction. Last, the dash eliminates ambiguity by forcing clear alternatives in legal reasoning. That is the law of excluded middle. So this completes our topic on the law of thought. This comprehensive breakdown of the law of thought includes their definition, application in law, and detailed explanation. Thank you so much for staying around, listening patiently. If this has helped, you may share it with your fellow students. Hope you like the video. It has helped you. Do like, share, subscribe if you haven't. Thank you very much. Best of luck.